History is all about stories. We collect facts and put them together to create a story about the past. Sometimes the stories we tell don't actually line up with the facts that we have. Sometimes we find new facts which force us to change the stories we tell. William Camden in 1584 told a number of wild stories about Castle Hill in Huddersfield, none of which are actually true. He said that it was the site of the Roman town Camulodunum, which is actually Colchester and about 160 miles away. He said that St. Paulinus in the 7th century AD built a cathedral there. No such cathedral ever existed. Finally, he said that it was burnt down that same century by King Penda of Mercia. Well, you guessed it, that didn't happen either. When I started researching this video, I stumbled on an amazing theory. But as I began to research more, I realised that actually that theory was wrong, there was no evidence for it, and I had to let go of it, which was quite painful as I'd grown quite emotionally attached to it. And so this video is not just about the history of a hill fort in Huddersfield, it's about how we actually do history. The life of Queen Cartimandua of the Brigantes is one of my favourite stories, and if you haven't done so already, I'd highly recommend watching my previous videos on her and the barrack and elm at Hillfort if you want to find out about this period in more detail. But in brief, Cartimandua was queen of the Brigantes tribe, who lived across most of northern England. When the Romans invaded, like many Celtic leaders, she allied with them, becoming infamous for handing over the rebel leader Caratacus in 51 AD. 6 years later, she divorced her husband Venutius and went with his chariot driver Velocatus. Venutius led a rebellion against her, and as an ally, the Romans sent her troops which she used to defeat her ex-husband. However, in 69 AD, a period of great instability across the empire, Venutius launched another revolt, and this time was victorious. Cartimandua fled and totally disappears from the pages of history. This is where my original theory came in, because Almondbury Hill Fort is very unusual. In William Varley's 1939 excavation, he found that most of the site had been burnt. There were indisputable signs of a great destruction by fire, and that from close observation on the site we came to the conclusion that the burning represents a deliberate attempt at destruction. What made this so fascinating for me was that it was extremely unusual for hill forts in England to be burnt. Over 70 of them were burnt in Scotland, with others in Ireland and mainland Europe, but hardly any in England. Why is this? Well, we're not entirely sure, but the point is that it was very, very odd that Almondbury was burnt. Surely, if the Romans just wanted to destroy these hill forts, they would have burnt similar ones in Yorkshire like Barwick and Elmet and Stanwick, but we have no evidence to suggest that. Hence, the only conclusion available was that the Romans deliberately destroyed Almondbury. This was echoed by the archaeologist Barry Cunliffe, who in 1975 wrote that the destruction cannot be precisely dated, but may well be linked to the advance of Petilius Cerialis. He was a Roman general who was sent to subdue the north from around 71 to 74 AD. My proposed theory was that Almondbury became something of a final last stand for the Brigantes in their revolt, the site of an extraordinarily violent battle in which the Romans defeated the Brigantes and then destroyed their hill fort, an act of supremely brutal retribution which was unprecedented in England. Varley made a number of later excavations at the site, and with the newly discovered technology of carbon dating was able to make a groundbreaking discovery. The fort had not in fact been burnt by the Romans. It was destroyed about 500 years earlier. Scientists estimated the date of burning to be around 431 BC. The usual margin of error is 180 years, so even if given either way, the fact remains the Romans could not have burnt this hill fort. In fact, when they arrived, it would have been a ruin, totally abandoned, because there's no other evidence of human settlement for another 1500 years. Okay, so you may be wondering what carbon dating is and how we can trust it. Well, a great way of thinking about it is like this nondescript can of fizzy drink. Now, as you can see, I'm pouring it out, and it's quite fizzy. There's quite a few bubbles in it. Now, if I were to leave this for about 2 hours, it'll have gone flat because all of the bubbles will have evaporated. So if I was to take 2 cans and then pour them out an hour apart, you could roughly tell which one had been poured out first because it would have fewer bubbles in it. And carbon dating works pretty much the same way, because all living things have carbon in them, and when we die, that carbon begins to decay. So you can measure when something died by counting how much carbon is left in it, rather like how many bubbles are left in this glass. Okay, so the Romans didn't burn it, but maybe it was a neighbouring Celtic tribe. I mean, the Celts loved to fight each other, so it wouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that maybe one burnt their enemy's Hillfort. But again, the problems arose when they started to look at the burnt timbers and stones. They found that the parts which would have burnt at the highest temperature were in the centre, whilst those which suffered less damage were on the outside. Now, let me break this down. Here obviously is a piece of wood, so let's imagine this is a wooden fence. Now, if you're going to set fire to it, obviously it'll burn through the outside first and then burn the inside. So how can you have something that burns the inside first and then goes to the outside? Well, they concluded it in more technical language in their report. Our own experiments in the field have shown that it is not possible by any means at our disposal to produce the effects observed inside the rampart by applying heat outside without causing the outer stones to be fire-reddened. In other words, the sum total of our efforts has been to suggest that the ramparts were not fired from the outside, but that the source of heat lay buried inside the rampart core. If so, then the likeliest source of that heat was spontaneous combustion, generated by the timbers in the rampart and fed by oxygen contained in the clay core and hollows between the stones. Ultimately, to the people who lived here, the damage was seen as so extreme that they couldn't repair it and instead decided to move and live somewhere else. This site would not see human habitation for another 1,500 years. I want to finish this video by doing, finally, what I originally set out to do, providing a history of the Hillfort. Using the methods described earlier, archaeologists have found that the earliest traces of human activity here date from around 2000 BC, a time called the Neolithic period. These people didn't make permanent settlements here. We've only found some burnt charcoal, bone fragments and decayed hummus, the remains of a Neolithic dinner. They would have used flint and stone as tools, and sharpened bones for needles and combs. A polished stone axe used for digging or cutting up wood has been found at the site along with some flints. People at this time had already learnt how to domesticate animals like sheep and goats, and grow crops like wheat and barley. But for whatever reason, they didn't stay here long. There's no burial remains or surviving structures. They simply stayed here for a short time, then moved elsewhere. There was considerable physical growth over the remains of this Neolithic era, so we know it was a long time before people returned to the site. But this time they wanted to stay. They built simple small buildings and an earthwork bank covering around 5 acres. Over the next few hundred years, as the community grew larger and the pressure to defend against neighbouring rivals increased, these earthwork banks slowly expanded, starting in around 590 BC, eventually with the addition of a wooden palisade. Cunliffe suggested that the largely pastoral economy, focused on sheep, cows, land, etc., contributed to neighbouring conflicts and therefore created the need for large defensive structures, as neighbouring tribes could easily steal your precious animals or land. But they weren't all warlike. In Varley's excavations, small fragments of pottery were found, and these may have been obtained via trade with neighbours. Because there's no written record of the Brigantes before the Romans, it's difficult to tell at which point these communities grouped together under a shared identity. How exactly this came about, whether it was violent or peaceful, and whether even the idea of the Brigantes existed at this point. So we don't know how these people viewed themselves and their community, how they would describe their tribal identity. Ultimately, that is unknowable and somewhat besides the point. The fact is, sometime around 431 BC, the fort suddenly caught fire. Most of it was destroyed, and the community, rather than attempting to rebuild it, simply left it to ruin and moved on somewhere else. This place would not see human habitation for another 1500 years, when the Norman de Lacy family, who owned much of Yorkshire, built a small Motte and Bailey castle on the site. But this too was abandoned by about 1260. Eventually, after hundreds more years, other people had their turn, building an alehouse there in 1810, which the Victorians replaced with a hotel. To walk around this site is to realise that you are standing on hundreds of years of history. And though the stories we tell about what happened all those thousands of years ago may continue to change depending on what new evidence comes to light, all that matters is that we continue to tell these stories. As Varley concluded in his final archaeological report, if, alas, we have to say goodbye to many of our former illusions, Cartimandua, the Brigantes, we still have left the most ancient historical monument in this area of Yorkshire. Hope you've enjoyed this video, I hope you've learned something new, and I hope to see you again soon.